always. And we'll take it from there. She's in the midst of moving, so I think they're packed up her house and she's moving to some base in Virginia. So maybe so anyway, glad y'all are here. And as I said, what we'll do is there's a number of new people on the call. We'll just invite everybody, like our usual hazing effort is to just ask you to introduce yourself and a little bit about what you're up to, and then we'll dive into what we're going to talk about today. So a couple of things. I just got off of a call with the HHS and the Children's Bureau on that we're talking about lately, and I'll give you a little bit of an update on that. It was an interesting sort of brainstorming on data interoperability and what they're thinking about and what they're looking at. So that was kind of encouraging in a way. So I'll share some information with that, and then we'll turn to our topic du jour, which is all about NEAM and how that will be a bunch of updates that Paul Wormley, who's on the call, who's joined us in the past, and our very own Brian Picker will provide some commentary and some ideas and open it up for suggestion or for discussion as we move into the conversation. And as always, feel free to jump into the conversation with comment, thought, or a bit of levity is always helpful as well. So, and I always, there's some new people here. There were, yes, okay, hi. Connor, welcome. Welcome. You want to just say a few words?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Connor Johnson. I am the Model of Care Coordinator for Hennepin County, working on integrating healthcare and housing across Hennepin County in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, thanks.
Welcome. We've been doing some work with a number of counties on the interoperability project for some rescue work, and Connor is, we had a really good conversation the other day about what Hennepin is doing, and I hope you'll share some of the great stuff. Hennepin, like a number of other counties who we know have been on the journey, been on the long march for a long time. A lot of good stuff to share up there. So welcome, glad you made it today. And James, welcome, glad you made it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Daniel, for having me. My name is James Pat. I'm the CEO of a company called Insight Health Systems. I've have about 30 plus years experience in technology and data sharing. I was fortunate to work with Paul Wormelli back at the IGES Institute. I was part of his board. And over the last course of the last really 5-6 years or so, I've been working the healthcare domain. We're doing a lot of work around with the Native Americans and trying to build up a healthcare system to support that, and very excited to be part of this.
Thanks, James. Welcome. Tom Carlson, greetings, welcome.
Hello. Well,
hello.
Thanks. I'm Tom Carlson. I'm with the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and which is new. Last time I was on one of these calls, I was a consultant, but that's changed. I actually got a real job. And I am here just to make sure Wormley and Handspicker don't see anything wrong. No, but I'm technical support for NEAM, specifically architecture stuff. So I've got a vested interest in how to make NEAM play nice with some of the things some of the rest of you are doing. And so wanted to sit in and hear what Paul and Brian had to say today.
Hey, Tom, congratulations on the new sinecure.
Yeah. So yeah. So then one meeting and somebody said, fellow wage slave now. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's true. But I also, I know where my next paycheck's coming from for a while. So that's good too.
Excellent. That's great. Tom, it was great. We had a chance, we were doing some work with the Pew Charitable Trust on civil justice and access to the courts. And Tom was one of the folks who brought his expertise, if I recall correctly, last year sometime. So interacted with you for a while. It's great to see you here. Who else is new? Aaron, I know that you showed up last time. I'm not sure you actually introduced yourself, but I may have a memory shortfall.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of being on the call once or twice before. Very, very interested in the NEAM conversation. Thank you for putting it together. I'm on the executive committee of the Gravity Project. So we're super interested in figuring out how do we better interoperate with our friends at NEAM.
Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining. And Megan, hi, glad you made it.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone. This is Megan Shanahan. I'm a program manager of informatics at HIMSS. So I manage some of our social determinants of health volunteer groups. Namely, we're standing up a new committee and also our task force that I know some folks from this group might be involved in, and Daniel has been a great member of as well. On top of that, I also manage our interoperability and HIE volunteer groups. So just really excited to learn a bit from this group and see if there's potential for even some more synergy around these groups as well. And excited to learn more. So thanks.
Thanks for joining, Megan. Looking forward to it. Yeah, we had a chance to chat this week about some of the social determinant work and the great work that Madeline had done with a lot of the folks on this call, and kind of continuing to move that forward in the intersections. There's seem to be continuing to be lots of interesting and productive overlaps in the work, especially some of the folks coming up for the HIMSS conference in March, right? March, around interoperability showcase and some of the good stuff that's happening there around consent. So thanks for joining, and we're looking forward to it. I think everybody else, everyone else is here. I'm going to, so I just want to say a few words about this effort because I'm excited about the connecting points. I think I mentioned last time that I had gotten, or a couple of weeks ago, I'd gotten invited to participate in a HHS roundtable, which was specifically focused on improving data interoperability between child welfare and Medicaid, but more broadly than that. And so the long awaited day showed today. There are about 30 people on the call. There are about 25 people on the call, which was great. And there's some questions that the ACF is now engaging in and bringing together. This is the fourth out of 5 roundtables they're doing around different components of data interoperability and sort of brushing up and brushing off some of the good work that's happened in the past. Some recent, just a very recently released toolkit between Medicaid and child welfare on how to improve the actual data sharing, the bidirectional information, CWIS systems and stuff like that, which is near and dear to many people's hearts, especially the integrated care for kids folks. So we've been sort of thinking on that all week, trying to get prepared for it. And I think they're gonna publish hopefully they'll publish some of the findings of that soon. But one of the things I just wanted to share, they had a really cool tool that they used that I wanted to share with you. And just to give you a sense of it, just because I found it to be, I like these online tools. See if I can share this here. Here it is. So this is called Mural. Everybody see my screen? You can't read the little the boxes, but it was kind of like a Google Doc, but real time. And this is one of the 2 questions that was posed, which was what are the gaps and barriers to access data and share that could improve outcomes for children. It's a really high level, broad question, which was good for conversation. A lot of people put in substantive comments here, and we can share these more broadly. But a lot of the issues that we know and love were repurposed here. So it's good to get it on people's screen. There's a lot of continuity between what's happening, what we've been talking about and others have been talking about for a while, which is great. I'm not sure what action is going to be taken from this. I am certainly, I was quite vocal about consent and actually was asked to present a bunch about it. So I described a lot about why it's so important and how it's connected to data interoperability and care management. And so to spread that word pretty broadly and pretty loudly today, it was fun to have that opportunity to do that. There's a lot of receptivity for it. Well, great. The other question is this: how can HHS better support states and tribes to better engage families, youth, communities in the development of sharing systems to improve health? Again, a pretty broad topic of conversation, but a lot of good ideas. And it was, again, the tool was great. I don't know how accessible it is, but for brainstorming, it was one of the better ones. You actually can really easily just click in a box, put your thought in it, and then you can easily sort of make comments on it. And it's a real sort of live effort. So for those of you doing brainstorming, I know it's really hard sometimes to get people's input. So it was pretty quickly people could do that, and the conversation was very formed by.
Daniel, what was the name of it again? The software?
Mural. Yeah, just called Mural. And folks, there was a person from ICF who's a contractor at ACF who actually ran it, but it was very easy to navigate and zoom in, zoom out, put ideas in there. And then you can sort of go down and stuff like that. So I thought it was great. And I'm glad to see them, engaged in the conversation. A lot of folks from different states and counties, tribes, communities, and a lot of federal agencies. Not everybody. They had a couple of keynoters that didn't show up, but but all the organizations were represented. I believe that. One of the main things I'm really interested in is how do we help engage HHS and Children's Bureau and ACF and CMS and CMMI together to bring them to the table around these problems, because like we know there needs to be federal coordination, which is happening, but it needs to be sort of accelerated, especially around health policy and how social and health services get integrated. And that was really the nature of the conversation, was how do we do that? A lot of confidentiality questions, a lot of standards questions, a couple, that were really people are looking for common standards and stuff like that. And with that, we can spend some more time. Maybe we can focus on whatever that comes out of that. But what was interesting, as I said, just this week they published, both CMS and ACF put out a joint toolkit on data sharing and data interoperability between child welfare and Medicaid. Great. And in the body of the document, they specifically talk about NEAM, which was good to see, because I know we've been talking about NEAM and FIRE and SEDS and others like that for a while. The fact that it's there, and that there's been actually at the same time a lot of sort of resurgence within the human services space. And so today's presentation is really on target for that, because that's what we're actually talking about. So it will be interesting as we look at doing more cross-domain interoperability, whether or not it's the demonstration sites that we hope to implement with the integrated care kid sites or other states. Colorado, Jennifer's here, raised her hand about willing and interested in participating in it. And there's other conversations that are happening. So NEAM, I think, will be an important part as we think about it, connecting in different parts of the client journey, so to speak. And so today we have Paul and Brian who are going to present and some very interesting new stuff that's happening, especially with the formation and the formalization of NEAM as a standards body, which Paul will pick us off with here. And so Paul, for those of you who know him, Paul is one of our board members and one of the original interoperability innovative strategists and thinkers from across the country and world, actually. And I've had the great pleasure and honor to have him on our board of directors. And he's actually one of the working board of director members, which means he actually does stuff, participates regularly, which is a wonderful thing. And so I'm just so glad that Paul has been continuing to devote substantial time to really championing a lot of interoperability issues. You can see from the bio, he's got a very distinguished and long history of working in this space, especially in the justice space, which is so important to kids and families. So Brian, we know well. I apologize, Brian, for not being able to regale you with the same slide introduction, but we know you well. And with that, let me turn over to Paul to take it away for us. And as we go, Paul, if there's, if people want to put in questions, you want to sort of keep it interactive, or you want to present then take questions? Do you have a particular preference?
Interactive is fine.
Cool. Okay.
Actually, Daniel, before we get started on the NEAM work,
yeah,
let me make one little announcement.
Oh yeah, please. Sorry.
The good news is we had our very first official IXFIS, Information Exchange for Human Services, a consensus body meeting this past week. And it looks like we're settling in on a 2-meeting-a-month schedule of, I think it's second and fourth Wednesdays from 12 to 1. Since this group was basically motivated, the creation of this standards body was motivated by the very work that we were doing here in Unify, I thought I'd let everybody know about the good work that our work has created.
Brian, you have to be a member of Direct Trust in order to participate, correct?
Yes, unfortunately, that is true. We did have 2 public meetings in November and December we called them strategy forum meetings, to try to give a chance for the non-direct trust community to participate. And that seems to have been very successful, since we've ended up with a good number of human services organizations joining direct trust and just to participate in ICFIS. So Jim, call up Scott Stewie and see what you can work out between your organizations.
Yeah, yeah, I have to follow up calls there.
Right, it's interesting. So Direct Trust used to be a transport standards development organization in my mind. What are they going to be doing in the human services space?
Well, we expect that one of the things they'll be doing for the human services community is to give the community an opportunity to determine what their transport requirements might be, including and especially for things like referral mechanisms and directories. It, however, is not our intent for this new body to compete with HL7 or any of the good work that many of us are already doing in the Gravity Project or the Fire Clinical Care, 360X and IEG, et cetera, but rather to look at how those existing standards can be used or profiled for the human services community, and or what new contributions does the human services community need to put into these existing standards bodies in order to ensure that their requirements are met.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Now, the goal here is not to replace or compete with anything. My heavens, if you look over the participants here, we've got people in just about every HL7 working group or many of the fire working groups. We've got people on the Gravity TAC, Executive Committee, Strategy Committee. So we're not looking at competing with ourselves here, but really another opportunity to bring the human services, the social services community into the standards process, since many of these organizations, they really have very little in the way of standards that have been completed, especially for the work that needs to be done for day-to-day operations of information exchange for human services. And I'm being very careful with that, knowing that I have Tom Carlson, who used to be the technical lead for NEAM Human Services, on this call.
No comment from Tom yet. I guess that's a good sign.
I'm just teasing Tom.
No, I
Yeah,
said
that's
a good sign.
fine. Yeah, no, that's fine.
He and I have had many a long session about NEAM Health and NEAM Human Services, and we don't need to trot that particular dirty laundry out here.
No, we don't. We do not.
So that's a good point. Before I turn it over to Paul again, any other sort of breaking news items that folks want to show that were useful before we kind of dive into details here? Okay, great. Paul, I think you have control.
Thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to. Just share your screen. There you go. Great.
So I really want to thank you, Daniel, for having us have this conversation today. I'm delighted to be able to have this talk with all of you representing all the different areas of expertise, as Brian mentioned. But I'm also very aware of the fact that there are varying levels of understanding and appreciation of what NEAM is and what it can do and how to connect with some of the initiatives of Project Unify and other work that the Stewards of Change Institute has undertaken and the whole NIC. So what I'm going to do, I hope will meet with your satisfaction, is I'm going to start with some really brief, basic concepts on what the heck NEAM is and how it operates. But I'm really focused on updating you. If some of you may have had some exposure to NEAM years ago and aren't aware of all the incredible things that have been happening, so I'm going to try to include a kind of a status report and also a peek at the future, and then hopefully when we get through that, Brian's going to talk about how NEAM really connects to the various initiatives in Project Unify and related initiatives and consent utilities, etc. So we have by the time we're done, we hope you'll have an understanding of what can NEAM do, what it can't do, and how it connects with some of the other objectives that we have in the whole NIC program. So I want to start, if it will work, with a simple little 3-minute video that kind of summarizes faster than I can what NEAM is all about. Can you all see this?
Mm-hmm.
There's no audio yet.
You can't hear it, though.
So is there an audio track, Paul?
Yes, there is.
So if you put pause on for a second, when you share your screen,
Yeah.
When you share your screen, there's a little button on the bottom left that says share the audio as well.
Yeah.
I think you got to do that for us to be able to hear it. Let's try that again.
Okay.
When using different terms that actually mean the same thing, NEAM lets your system and my system speak to and understand each other, even if they've never spoken before, by ensuring that information carries the same consistent meaning. Let's say 3 organizations identify the need to exchange information related to a person. Their information, though similar, is defined differently. All organizations have a concept of a person's last name. One refers to it as last name, while another refers to it as surname, while the third refers to it as family name. The same concept, but different defining terms. Using NEAM, organizations come together to agree on a common vocabulary. Rather than starting from scratch, NEAM provides agreed upon terms, definitions, relationships, and formats, independent of how data is stored in individual systems, so that last name, surname, and family name all mean the same thing, person surname, once they're mapped to NEAM. And now, thanks to NEAM, this exchange can be expanded beyond these 3 organizations, so that when a 4th, 5th, or 20th organization wants to join the conversation, this initial exchange can be easily understood and reused, saving time and money. So how does NEAM work? There are 2 concepts that help illustrate NEAM and how it works. The first is common language. NEAM is a reference model that includes community-specific content, as well as core content, with common terms that are agreed upon by all the communities that use NEAM. In this way, NEAM ensures interoperability, because all information used in NEAM-based exchanges use consistent definitions. For example, a few of the most common elements in the NEAM core include person, location, item, organization, and activity. The diverse communities that leverage NEAM collaboratively govern the model. Community subject matter experts develop reusable content in NEAM to meet community needs. As those needs evolve, NEAM allows for flexibility and growth. The second concept to explain how NEAM works is the exchange development lifecycle. This repeatable, reusable process for using the NEEM model to define an information exchange makes the development of exchanges faster, more efficient, and more cost-effective. So now you know what NEEM is in a nutshell, but there is so much more to learn. So visit our website at neem.gov to learn more. Also, help us spread the word by sharing this video.
So really what we're talking about with NEEM is the mission of NEEM is simply stated as a way to facilitate interagency and cross-domain information exchanges. I think as far as I can tell, NEEM is about the only framework that I'm aware of that really deals with cross-domain information exchange specification. And this is kind of a fundamental notion of NEEM. Also, it's important to underline the N in NEEM because this was not developed as a federal standard, but most people understand that. It was really developed by state and local people initially that the federal government finally bought into, but supported it all along. But a lot of exchanges have been built on NEEM now that are routine and in place. There's a lot of stuff in the justice world, and also prescription drug monitoring, which I'll talk more about later. The FBI uses it extensively and has incorporated data elements in NEEM for a lot of different things. Centers for Disease Control has emergency preparedness, exchanging critical emergency management information. There's a very important interstate compact for placing children in foster care across state lines that uses NEEM. Indian Child Welfare Act notice uses NEEM. There's other information exchanges that have been built famously on NEEM, including the Census Bureau's use of NEEM for the latest census. So it's out there all over the place. And really, NEEM was created to answer the question of how do we eliminate some of the roadblocks to interoperability, particularly these four that we all know that there's still many, many silos of incompatible and proprietary software out there that keep us from sharing information well. We know that part of the problem is that there's a lack of consensus on data standards of all kinds. Even though there are many standards, there are very few standards that really deal with this at the metadata level. We have cultural impediments to information sharing that still exist between many, many disciplines. And we haven't really had the resources for making changes to all of this for a long time. So what does NEEM do? NEEM makes two contributions to all this. The first of it is that NEEM really provides a way to come to an agreement on the consistent terminology and meanings of terms. There are now some 12,000 terms, data components in NEEM that have been harmonized across all of the various disciplines involved in NEEM. The second thing that NEEM has to offer is a syntactic interoperability. Really, it's just simply stated as the standards for how you represent those data items in NEEM. And that's plenty for NEEM to contribute. It does not do some things that other standards organizations do, like provide standards for the messaging formats and protocols, for example. That's external to the NEEM mission. Now, there's really three things that keep NEEM going. One is the community of interest, and the second is the data model itself, and the third is the methodology. The NEEM community is really an interesting artifact here. The intention has always been to engage people from the local, state, federal, tribal, territorial, and international, and the private sector arenas to come together. And there's about 3,000 people that are actively involved in this community at this point. And there's three principles on which NEEM operates. First of all, is collaboration. Everyone has an equal voice in all of these activities and decision-making of NEEM. This is not dominated by the federal government or any other component. Secondly, it's an equality of voice so that people are encouraged to speak to it, and there are representations on the governance body that permit this. And that it operates on a consensus basis. It's not a a regulatory process or anything that comes out of federal law or state law. And that's kind of defines this community. It's really an interesting, almost ad hoc way of bringing a community together. There is a governance process. There's a NEAM Executive Steering Council, which is really consists of the sponsoring federal agencies, the CIOs from Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, and most recently the CIO from the Department of Defense. There's a NEAM small but mighty NEAM Management Office, which is a small staff that keeps things going, handles the onboarding of new domains and so on, stimulates work and actually arranges for funding of some of the technical work. That NEAM Management Office doesn't really do any of the work. The work is really done by two committees. The NEAM Technical Architecture Committee, which has a basis of individual stakeholders from the user community. We have on the call today two members of the Technical Architecture Committee. Brian and Eric Jan are both members of that committee. And I hope they'll comment whenever they feel inclined to do so. The other committee that's important is the Business Architecture Committee, and this is really where all the harmonization of data goes on. And each domain that's involved in the NEAM program has an opportunity to create task forces to come together and propose data elements and content for the reference models that are created using NEAM. So what this whole governance body does is deal with the domains that are involved in NEAM. We've had this collection of domains for some time. It kind of started out in the justice world, but it quickly expanded, particularly to the emergency management and human services and immigration and infrastructure protection, intelligence, international trade, maritime. And the military got very involved with NEAM, and part of my announcement to you today is DoD is about ready to adopt NEAM as a standard for every single system in DoD and all the services and throughout DoD. So it's bought into this whole thing big time. The other some of the other domains are more active than others. Frankly, human services, as Tom will tell you, have not progressed as much as we would like to see them progress. But there are others that are getting very active. The new cyber domain, which was the newest domain, is really working hard on defining exchange standards for the reporting of cyber incidents, sharing of cyber incidents amongst all the stakeholders and federal, state, and local levels and private industry. And what's really happened that's kind of been most interesting to many of us is that just in the last year, we've seen the surfacing of new domains. The Census Bureau is leading an effort to create a statistics domain, which will impact a whole lot of people at the federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial level. And this last fall, the Executive Steering Committee approved two new domains, one on learning and development, which is really kind of just trying to tap into the whole education domain. And then our first international domain, which is an international human resources domain that's being led by one of the human resources organizations in Canada. So that sort of puts NEAM into the international world. It's also appropriate to let you know that there are efforts being made by Canada to translate NEAM into French because Canada has kind of bought into NEAM lock, stock, and barrel for all, particularly in the human services and public service kinds of activities. There's all kinds of work going on with implementing NEAM in Canada in that regard. And we're eager to see how this international domain works. And they're looking to add people to a task force and working committees from the U.S. as they expand this out as well. So those domains continue to be proposed, and there's opportunity for others. There's some talk about HUD developing a domain for housing and urban development. There's talk about building a domain more in the delivery of human services programs, whether it's home visiting programs or others, all under the auspices of the human services domain, perhaps, or separately. There's also in existence, technically, a health domain, but you don't see it on this list because there really hasn't been much done to foster that development from the Department of Health and Human Services, even though they signed up to be the steward of these domains. Every one of these domains has a steward, and there's a charter for what it means to be a steward, and each one has the responsibility to propose data elements, but also to participate in the governance of the entire NEAM system. The second really big part of NEAM, of course, is the model itself, and the 5.0 version is out there, 5.1, I think, actually, and we're madly working on 5.2. And as the little video showed you, the data model consists of core data that are harmonized across all the domains, and then a set of domain-specific data elements that are unique to individual domains. Each one of them has the opportunity to name as many as they like. All of this is done in accordance with a set of naming and design rules that have really come out of international standards to create how we actually use the language we use to define how name and incorporate data elements, very strongly related to ISO standards. There are now some 12,000 data components in NEAM, and the next release, 5.2, that's going to be coming out soon, could raise this to about 20,000 data components across all of the domains that we're speaking of. So another key part of NEAM is the methodology itself, and this is another change that's happening that's extremely valuable and interesting. The NEAM development cycle, we used to call these things the Information Exchange Package Documentation, IEPDs, and that's now being renamed to Message Specifications. That's really what the purpose of NEAM is to create the kind of message specification that will completely and succinctly define an exchange sufficiently for it to be coded and used in an information exchange. But this model of how to do that has been found to be very effective, and it's been done hundreds of times now, and lots of lessons learned about how to create these message specifications. And originally, all of this work was done in XML because at the time NEAM got off the ground, XML was the most common way that people defined and specified ways to exchange data between systems. But of course, times have changed, and we've learned how to do things in new ways. We came across with a new model called JSON, which is in some ways a simpler and better way to express exchange information. So the folks at NTAC and Tom Carlson and others have figured out that we need to get some kind of way to make NEAM usable using JSON rather than XML. And so work has been ongoing for some time to make a JSON-friendly version of NEAM, basically. But that led to an exploration of how we could redo the whole model and create a meta model, really, that allows for the expression of this model in a variety of different formats that are a function of what you need to do to proliferate the use of this model. So among other things, the NTAC is exploring ways to create an expression of the NEAM model fully using RDF and OWL to have a standards-based, semantically consistent ontology of the entire model that would foster the development of the use of knowledge graph technologies as a way to integrate data and systems throughout all of the different domains or within a domain. That meta model is we can have Tom tell us more about it. But basically, they're hoping to have that work completed by around this summer and have it available for people to use to create expressions of the model in different formats depending on what you want to do with it. There's a lot of interest in making NEAM more compatible with knowledge graph technology, and that seems to be a driving force in this whole thing. Now, along with that, at the same time, this whole effort has been going on, that a lot of folks have been trying to figure out what's the best future for NEAM and how do we make it not only sustainable but available to anybody that needs it, and how do we turn it into a true standard. There was a lot of interest in actually making it an international standard, but at least a U.S. standard. And so after a lot of consideration by the NTAC and by the NEAM Management Office and the Executive Steering Committee, we just announced a couple of months ago that the ownership of the NEAM management approach and program will be shifted to be under the auspices of OASIS rather than under any individual department of government. It has been that the Executive Steering Committee has been rotated from agency to agency after every few years, and it's always been an issue of who's going to be the next agency to take it on. And the hope is that by moving this to OASIS, it'll have a permanent home, but it also will help become a true standard. As you know, OASIS is one of the standards development organizations that really creates and uses the ANSI franchise to create ANSI standards and totally engages industry as well as government agencies in sponsoring work and developing the model, and to give it much more standing as a formal exchange standard. There's a lot of excitement about this on everybody's part because it is a way to give this program more long-term life, and we're also exploring some issues right now about how to get earmarks in Congress to support the further development and continued development of NEAM as a tool for cross-domain information sharing under the OASIS banner. So that's kind of a major shift that's very important to, I think, to the work that we're doing with Project Unify.
Hey, Paul, can you let's just pause there for a second?
Yeah.
That was really, obviously it's a really important point. And I just want to just pause and open the floor for other of our standards body aficionados and kind of thoughts about what does that mean? What the implication of that is as we think about care coordination or these actual efforts to connect the dots between and amongst these in a sense competing standards, right? Justice or education or housing. And it seems like just a good moment to pause for a second and see if folks have anything to throw
Sure.
in the conversation.
I was very intrigued about the discussion of let's just say an RDF meta model. I realize you mentioned OWL too, an our RDF meta model for NEAM. And I'm wondering then, HL7 has a bazillion different implementation guides, which are process flows for HL7 Fire, which is in and of itself a JSON object. But I could see choosing a NEAM meta model around a process flow or something that's been developed for information exchange from another industry, and that RDF would still pertain to an exchange of HL7 Fire JSON as well. I don't know if that's been considered. I know that NEAM hasn't been terribly active in the healthcare sector to date, but.
No, you're right on with that observation. I think that's one of the things that many of us involved with NEAM are hoping will facilitate is that connection between Fire and NEAM, based on having an ontology that for NEAM that is isn't much more comparable in the way it supports standards like RDF. So that's exactly the kind of thing we're thinking. I've talked to many times with the NEEM Management Office about this, and what NEEM really wants to do is to find ways to peacefully coexist with other ontologies and standards, so that nobody in NEEM thinks that this is the answer to all standards. It simply focuses on this semantic interoperability but across domains, but that in order to do that, we have to figure out how NEEM and its data content can be compatible with other standards. Like the education department has their own notion of standards. It's not fire, it's another model that they've used. So it's really important for NEEM to, if it's going to deal with cross-domain information standards, to be able to peacefully coexist with other standards like fire.
Yeah, this is Tom. What we realized was that embedding modeling concepts inside XML schema was, in the end, not a good idea, in that it limits you to what XML schema can do, and it makes it very, very difficult to then move to other options. Makes it difficult to move to JSON because XML schema and JSON do not have the same feature set. Makes it hard to move to RDF because XML schema and RDF do not have the same feature set. It acts as a limiting factor. That what can NEEM do? Well, it can do what XML schema can do, and that's not good. So the idea with the meta model here is a common model format that defines the model in modeling terms rather than embedding it into a particular technology, and that then makes it hopefully much easier to go from that common model format to XML schema or to JSON or to OWL and RDF and YAML if you want. It's a number of different possibilities, and that's combined with a desire to make NEEM more of a formal ontology. I mean, NEEM has relationships and classes and stuff like that, and you can say, ta-da, it's an ontology, but it's not really a formal ontology. And so there's great interest in actually making it be a good ontology. And for that, of course, we need resources and we need people and we need money. And there are things afoot to try to do that. And I think, Brian, who isn't going to get a chance to talk, but Brian has some insight on some of those because he's been working on some of the proposals for that work.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. But the notion of putting this under OASIS and doing this meta model work in concert with moving this to OASIS really is going to give OASIS, we think, most of us think, a wonderful starting point to create this formal standard based on a formal model ontology to figure out how NEEM interacts with lots of different ontologies. Let me just finish this off a little bit. One of the neat things about NEEM, unlike other models, is that there's a whole catalog of tools that you can use at no cost to build these exchanges, message exchanges. Now they were designed to build IEPDs. Now will really be designed to build message specifications to manage the models, search and discovery of components, all kinds of different tools. All of these are available at no cost through neem.gov and related GitHub sites. There's online training classes that Tom has actually been the key author of a new version of these training classes, which have been held in the last couple of months. And there's this online instructor-led training being offered right now. That's really helping people understand some of these advancements in NEEM. There's help information available on migration to NEEM and other technical assistance available at no cost. So, one of the things people in the the work that's led to NEAM have found with some other standards is they cost money, but NEAM has no cost associated with it, and the tools are all freely available. There's spreadsheets with the model on there you can download and use the terminology. And that's another thing I wanted to say is that all of every single data component in NEAM that is appropriate is based on an ISO or related standard. So NEAM went to great lengths at GTRI to build the original NEAM model, not trying to reinvent the wheel where there was an authoritative source for a particular data component. We'd use the value structure of that authoritative source rather than create another standard. It's just trying to avoid that old joke that, what happens when you try to create a standard and all you're doing is create another standard. So a lot of these standards have gone in to be progressed on to become formal ANSI standards, and there's a whole list of them here you can see that are actually in some formal status as a separate information exchange standard. And there's many more besides this, but these are some of the ones that have actually been created over the last decade or so that NEAM's been around. And the arguments for using NEAM are pretty clear and obvious to a lot of people now. It really does provide that capability to do this harmonization by collaborating, bringing together stakeholders and having the community engaged in the development of this model has just been enormously helpful. And the whole idea is to follow this notion of our best effort is to make these schema reusable, so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we want to put up a data component of what is name and how do you express name. It really saves money in development, and we've seen we have documented evidence of people that use NEAM to build their systems have saved on the order of 50% of the time and cost to build exchanges. That even applies in the European Union. Used NEAM to build a warrant that was used in 26 different countries, and they attested to the fact that they save 50% of the cost and time to get that work done. So it does lower development costs, and it really lets us have that common vocabulary that can be shared across domains. And in the end, we think that reduces maintenance costs and allows for increased interoperability. So I just want to give you one success story. Some years ago, many of the states were creating laws requiring pharmacies to report to the state and to document the sale of controlled substances. And states built this over the last maybe 10, 15 years. So every state has a database of these things. But, well, it turned out in the opioid crisis that there was a problem as the diversion of these controlled substances continues under the opioid crisis. That people were doing doctor shopping and going across state lines to get another prescription so they could get more drugs. Or there was a lot of fraud going on in the use of prescriptions themselves. But the states had no way to exchange data across the state lines. And it was a very delicate issue because a lot of the doctors didn't want to see exchanges to show how their prescriptions were being abused. So the states came together and asked the question, how can we use the ability to see across state lines with these prescription drug monitoring systems in every state? And the answer was NEAM, to have a prescription monitoring program to allow substance abuse agencies and law enforcement in states to look across state lines and compare the usage of drugs, if in adjacent states, in order to save the time of either enforcement or providing substance abuse assistance. And it's been an extremely successful program. It's now active in all the states. IGES Institute actually creates a message exchange capability between the states to allow this to happen. There's a whole lot of material on NEAM you can find, much more than we have time to talk about here. NEAM.gov has been recently completely redesigned and is much more useful, in my opinion. There's actually a contact us page in the new NEAM.gov. If you have questions, you can ask them, and there's a process for the management office to get an answer to your question, even if it means getting Tom Carlson on the phone with you. There's the training sites available on the NEAM.github site, as well as technical resources for doing all this work. You can download the current release from the GitHub, NEAM.github site. There's development resources, there's implementation support. All the tools are available at NEAM.gov. You can really find a lot of information there. You can also take advantage of the management office. The managing director is Catherine Escobar, and she doesn't mind getting emails. Her assistant is Steve Sullivan, who's kind of their chief of staff. And Mike Phillips and I are serving as co-chairs of a NEAM Tiger team addressing state, local, tribal, and territorial agencies and their use of NEAM. And our job is to communicate and make a two-way street between the state, local, tribal, and territorial agencies and the NEAM management office. So to get information out on what's happening with NEAM, and also to seek input from those communities on what's needed in NEAM in a big-time way to make sure that that we sustain this program to do what it's needed in those agencies. And Mike and I are actively making this kind of presentation around the country and the various organizations and with Catherine, but we're also there to make connections for people to get resources to help with NEAM. And it's all under the auspices of the SLTT Tiger team. So now I'm happy to answer any questions before we turn it over to Brian.
Well, I think there's an interesting conversation happening in the chat here around the actual application of NEAM, which is kind of a good segue, I think, for Brian and you and Jim and and others in this conversation. So Paul, I think you've laid out exactly, what I was hoping you could share with us: the robustness and the acceleration of NEAM. Can we use it? And Brian, I'm hoping you can pick up on, how do we use it to do the cross-domain work that's so important to social determinants, recognizing, etc. So, questions for Paul or comments to Paul and or Brian, if you want to, that'd be great.
I guess the question I have is how did you land on Oasis? Like why did you guys deem Oasis as the place to sort of give birth to NEAM outside of the government?
Well, that's a good question. I think there was consideration of a variety of standards development organizations. That's what the NEAM Management Office and many of the people involved in NEAM wanted was an established formal organization that truly is focused on standards development.
And by the way, Stewards of Change.
Stewards of Change was considered, actually. Stewards of Change was absolutely one of the candidates for a choice for an organization to do this. And there were several others, but Stewards of Change, much as I love it and that I'm part of it, is not a formal standards development organization yet. We don't have a track record of implementing, we don't have a franchise for being an ANSI organization, for example. Oasis does. They have processes for vetting and processes for onboarding projects and whatnot that are well established and well known, and they have international connections. We're trying to make Stewards of Change international, but we haven't got there yet. It's just maybe just a little bit early in the life of stewards of change to do this, but it was a consideration actually.
Thank you.
Any other? With that, I think we should turn this over to Brian to talk about some of the use cases that Project Unify can offer to help tie the usefulness of NEAM together with other scenarios and domains. Brian?
Thank you. I trust that my slide deck is now up on the screen for everybody.
Yep.
Okay, great. And just as by way of introduction, since not everybody knows my backstory, especially the new folks on the call today. About a decade ago, I was the program architect for New York State's Office of Children and Family Services. And in that role, I was tasked with figuring out how we meet the regulatory requirement for OCFS to basically collect every single piece of information, records, documents, et cetera, associated with a child in state care, whether they were foster kids, juvenile justice clients, just developmentally disabled adults in group homes, et cetera. We had a regulatory requirement to collect all this information and then turn it over to, in the case of a child, them when they turn 18 or 21. The difference in those ages is not germane at the moment. And the big problem was that a lot of these were now electronic records, not paper records. The state was heavily going towards getting rid of their entire skyscrapers full of file cabinets filled with pieces of paper in them. And so they needed to figure out, how do they collect information from school systems and the courts and family law and the healthcare systems and pharmacies and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, given that they're all in different formats based on different standards, in some cases, no standards whatsoever. So I'm afraid I got my baptism of Project Unify fire a decade ago. Fast forward to about 2.5 years ago, and I was for a couple of years there, I was the technical lead for the NEAM Health Community of Interest as part of the Federal Health Architecture program. And in that particular role, my job was to try to figure out, how do we define how you map between existing healthcare standards and the use of healthcare related information by other NEAM domains. And we had identified across, at the time, 14 different domains. You'll notice we have actually added in the cyber statistics, and I don't think we've got humanitarian aid yet, but a couple of others that Paul introduced us to. Across these 14, 6 of those domains made use of healthcare related information about individuals. Depending on how you counted them, between 240 and 400 different data elements were being defined in NEAM that had some relationship to healthcare information. You arrest somebody, you want to create an arrest record as part of the NEAM justice domain. And you need to indicate that the person you've arrested is sneezing, coughing, and seems to be suffering from the flu. Well, the problem was that all of these definitions, as far as I could tell, were defined by somebody who was not an expert in health IT, was defined for a specific ad hoc reason, and none of them had been based on or mapped to anything that was being done in the formal health IT standards organizations like HL7. So this led to a small problem. You arrest somebody and you say they have the flu. How do you then turn around and map that electronically and automatically to the prison's electronic health record system? You really can't. So somebody has to go and read the arrest record on the computer screen and then re-enter that data into the EHR, attempting to, of course, select the correct codes for influenza in order for the EHR system to know what they're talking about. Well, this isn't the ideal scenario. So we were attempting at the time that the Federal Health Architecture Program was sunsetted to provide a mapping between the healthcare world and the NEEM world, because we recognized that though health was not necessarily a domain in its own right that we would define a whole bunch of NEEM stuff for, there's a lot of stuff around the edges of clinical health that involves NEEM domains, whether it's human services or justice, emergency management, military operations, for that matter, immigration, customs, maritime, all have scenarios, all have user stories involved in the collection and exchange of information that would otherwise be deemed healthcare related information. And we needed to be able to say, here's how we map it back into the health IT standards world. Unfortunately, the entire program was shut down and we weren't able to follow through on it. But at that time, I had made the jump to working on Project Unify, because here we were back into Unify was working on the same problem that I've been trying to solve and succeeded to some extent in solving for New York State, which is how do we collect information? How do we exchange information between all these different kinds of domains? And as part of that, I'm gonna quickly show the pretty picture that we created for all of this, which isn't it lovely? But there's no real content here other than a very pretty picture. We're gonna skip ahead to here. We came up with, I came up with about 13 different scenarios, user stories that involved dire and terrible things, tremendous pain or challenges for communities. My lady love started to suggest that I had a little bit of Stephen King in me, since I kept coming up with these terrible, terrible things to do to communities and human beings. But these were important scenarios to talk about because they explored those edges between the clinical health world and the rest of the NEEM world. Now, mind you, this was from a how do we map clinical health to all of these other non-clinical health domains that happen to be NEEM domains. And in a lot of the work that we're doing today, and I'm in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think Amanda forwarded you all a copy of the presentation. Feel free to read through them. You know, each one has a short description of it. I'm particularly, no. See, we get earthquakes and tsunamis and nuclear meltdowns. I love my dirty bomb on the high seas scenario. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Strait of Juan de Fuca, it happens to be the little body of water you have to travel down if you want to go to either Vancouver or Seattle. And if you turn to the port, you go to Vancouver. If you turn to the starboard, you go to Seattle. But if you go straight ahead, you run into Boeing's airfield. Not a really good place to put a dirty bomb. So, but fast forward another couple of years, and we were asked by the NEEM program office to come up with some scenarios where NEEM might be used as part of a collection of ontologies. So Eric and I worked on a couple of scenarios. One was this decarceration to community, where one of our personas, we have for those of you who are new to Unify, we have a family of personas called the Thompson family, who we do terrible, terrible things to, all in the interest of finding out where the problems are and how we can address with interventions for people who are living in vulnerable lives. But we sent Sarah Thompson, the mother of the family, to jail for for DUI, specifically due to an opioid substance use disorder and for a problem with her child getting into her medications. But now she's completed her time, and she needs to get back out. She needs to kind of rebuild her life. So this scenario, which we document in longer form elsewhere, is talking about creating a decarceration plan of action, working with the continuum of care case manager to identify what her needs are. Well, she's lost her apartment, she's lost her job, she's lost her child to foster care as a consequence of her actions. But now she needs to rebuild that life. She needs to get a job. She needs to get housing. She needs to get food benefits to survive once she's gotten back out of jail. She might need some career training to help her get a better job, particularly given her legal status. All in a bid to try to regain Jameson from state mandated out of home care. And I created a pretty little data flow that some of you who have seen our demos, Unify demos before, might recognize the basics of, where we have a prison system based on NEAM that's going to provide release notifications and other notifications to a continuum of care case management system, which at some other later point may share with the family court that has responsibility for her son's, Jameson's foster care situation, sending a service plan on to the family court to help them understand where Sarah is in her rehabilitation and an ability to take Jameson back into her household. As part of this decarceration plan, hypothetically, Sarah would take what's called a prepare survey, which is for those of you who don't know, it's one of the standard surveys you give to folks to determine what their social care needs might be. That in turn, the results of that is placed into an electronic health record system through some FHIR questionnaire response resource interaction, I should say. And that in turn is subscribed to by the continuum of care case management system, which enables the case manager in consultation with Sarah, still in jail, to determine exactly what her needs are going to be and to submit referrals off to those needs. Some of those referrals would be HUD HMIS API based, some of them might be FHIR based, some of them might be NEAM based, depending on what the particular information domain requires for that. The next one was, and I'm almost done here, by the way, in terms of time, Eric and Sonia put together a family reunification plan. And Eric, my apologies, I created this during the first 5 minutes of our meeting here. So if I have been a bit brief in your description, it's simply because I was blindly grabbing a paragraph and dropping it in place. But as part of Sarah's decarceration plan, she would work with the local HMIS continuum of care HMIS system, which in turn prescribes a HUD housing choice voucher for Sarah in collaboration with the local child welfare system. And that's to make sure that she gets appropriate housing, not just for herself, because she could leave and go into a homeless shelter and perhaps get some Section 8 housing, but she needs to make sure that she's in appropriate housing for Jameson, and very shortly she's also going to give birth to Madison, just in terms of the little novella of user stories we've created. So, without that voucher, she could remain homeless and not be reunited with Jameson. So once again, we've got a pretty picture showing how all of this works. And I would do this a great disservice trying to walk anybody through it. Do you want to speak up, Eric, about this picture, this data flow?
I'll just be really brief since we're getting close to the time, but
this is the last slide, so take your time.
Oh, I'm sure everybody wants to.
I'm going to make everybody do their homework and read through the rest of the slides.
I'll just do some highlights. I mean, you can all see the workflow. It's a little bit convoluted, but the key is that at the center of it all, really, it's the Public Child Welfare Agency between, at the bottom. They make the determination in step 3 for the referral to the housing choice voucher, for the housing choice voucher to the local public housing authority. And then from there, they kind of orchestrate, reuniting, in our use case, the child Jameson with his mother, Sarah Thompson. So it's just another way NEEM can be used. We can use JSON LD for a lot of these messages using NEEM. And JSON LD is compatible with like RDF and ontology. So it's all very, how we transport the data, using APIs, is something we'd have to work out. But there are many options for that, and many standards we could use, things like Fire or Web Sub, or who knows. Anyway, that's just another example, kind of a sub use case within Brian's decarceration workflow. That's all I've got, Brian.
I was going to add in that in terms of the transportation protocol, most Fire implementations that I know of, the RESTful API based ones, they're just using HTTPS to the get put post delete operations of HTTP on the Fire resources, these Fire JSON things, or under the covers, these the databases that are implementing the Fire servers are implemented on top of. So it's not unreasonable to think of this as really just basically everybody's going towards Open API. Everybody's going towards the using HTTPS as their protocol of choice. An awful lot of them are going with OpenID and with OAuth 2. And so there seems to be a lot of convergence across multiple different industries towards a common transport protocol. Now the question becomes, well, what do we have as, and by the way, in every single one of these domains, we have ontologies that are specific to the domain, even within healthcare. We don't have one Fire domain. We have, 14 or so different domains, podiatry and pediatrics and et cetera, each of which has its own unique requirements, its own unique information. So the real question then becomes, what is the core ontology? We have NEEM core over on the NEEM side of things. We basically have the equivalent of a Fire core. We have definitions for what a person is, what an organization is, what a service is, et cetera. Can we somehow over the coming few years get alignment between the definitions of these core elements of the different ontologies that we're working with? And if we can't get alignment between them, can we at least map between them so that it's easy for us to consider interoperability between a Fire system and a NEEM system?
And that actually will be the topic of our next ontology work group meeting in February. So contact Amanda, who's not here today, but with Stewards of Change to get on the bi-monthly meeting schedule for that. And we'll be talking about core mappings this time around, and also in the context of the new NEEM ontology work, and what requirements that might have, and how we could do some practice mappings, maybe with HMIS and NEEM or something like that for fun.
Thanks, guys. That was fantabulous. And a lot of information, but I think we got us right to the point of really thinking about how do we cross domains, right? I think that's the main question that I think you pointed out well. And I think that what's exciting to me is when we think about education, we think about housing, we think about justice programs and healthcare and a variety of social services, including Medicaid. How how are we going to harmonize them? You know, how are we going to bring the various ontologies together in a way that can actually be successful to make that happen? You know, to make that happen. And I think that's really the question at the table right now. So.
And I just want to thank you for your paying attention to this. And Daniel's asked the right question, and I want to assure you that Brian and Eric and Tom Carlson and I and others are eager to talk with anybody about how do we solve that problem. Thank you, Daniel.
Yep. I mean, I would love to bring this, you know, as I said earlier, that HHS conversation I was part of earlier today, and the context, the interest I know from within the folks building out the new CWIS systems and the executive leadership at ACF and the federal level. You know, it's so important to have that federal involvement, right? Because you've got it just sort of recapitulates itself at the federal level. So the fact that they're even talking about it, you know, sort of that cross-domain integration, having, you know, more national leadership in this area will be, I think, important. You know, I mean, everybody's, you know, we got to play together in some ways, right? And this seems like a way. I mean, I don't know of another way that people have brought forward that that we can really address the reality on the ground of all these different either standards-based or no standards yet, right? I mean, who knows what's going to happen with that? But those human services don't actually have any standards at all. So, you know, and folks, you know, on the gravity work and other folks that are involved in federal and state work, that's really the question at hand right now. And
Human
we're officially, let me just say we're officially in overtime. So if people have to jump off, by all means, you're free to cut and run. But if we have a few more minutes, people will hang on for this part of the conversation as well. So go ahead.
Before Tom and Paul jump all over you, Human Services does have some NEAM IEPDs that have been defined. The majority of them are more oriented at interstate exchanges of information for foster children in movement, or you know, the annual reports kind of things or quarterly reports. There are some good justice domain definitions that were created for child welfare to chase after deadbeat dad kind of things. And I shouldn't say deadbeat dad because it could be a deadbeat mom, depending on the circumstances. But
work on the language, Ryan. I got to work on the language.
Sorry about the whitebeard language. In any case, but in terms of day-to-day operational human services, like how do you request SNAP benefits, or how do you deal with WIC, or how do you deal with housing, Section 8 housing rental assistance? We have no standards for those yet. And that's a phenomenal opportunity, either for NEAM or for the Gravity Project / HL7's Human and Social Services Working Group, which just started up in December. We had our first big meeting a couple of weeks ago.
Thanks. So I sure hope we can bring this to the the Inc. sites and wherever else we end up doing some demonstration projects, as well as just general sort of dissemination across different associations and partners here. So we'll continue to focus on that.
And Tom, did I represent your world well enough?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm not jumping on anybody. Nope. Jumping on anyone.
So could I, if we're in overtime, do you think we could pull up the one slide where you had like these magical arrows that enabled interoperability between all these disparate systems, and just maybe get educated on, what those arrows really represent, right? Because I would hope to God it would be wonderful if it was as easy as it looks, right? But I want to make sure that it's not oversimplified in my mind.
Well, I can talk to this one, and Eric can talk to the other one.
Which one did you want to talk about, Aaron?
So I can see, I can see the value of replacing a fax or a print to bring information between these two organizations. And you can do that with any number of transport protocols, right? But I guess I'm trying to really understand to the best of my ability, right? In the workflow of an actual human being who's trying to get these services, what is the technologies that we have to implement? And, you know, if NEEM is the right fit, that's fantastic. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around, you know, like we said, none of these entities have they've adopted standards to some degree, but I don't know that they're doing interoperable exchange at the individual care level in any way. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's what I'm hoping to learn, that I have more to learn here, and there's a shortcut that I don't know about.
Are you talking specifically about the right-hand side of this slide?
The right-hand side of this slide, the left-hand side of the slide is, I think, fairly straightforward, right?
Well, when I first started with Unify 2.5 years ago or so, I walked in having just fresh from NEEM, with the expectation that, you know, NEEM was going to be a substantial contributor here. And I also expected that there were already going to be human services, NEEM message specifications, IEPDs, using the old term.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, there were education standards out there. I expected there would be housing standards and, you know, et cetera. And so I expected that I'd walk into an environment in which there were a half a dozen different standards, slightly different protocols being defined, certainly different class definitions, resource specifications out there for the different domains. And I was pretty stunned to realize that that really all we had was some work from in the educational world around SEDS, SIF, and EdFi and PESC for the secondary and college world. And of course, the various and sundry are wealth of standards in the healthcare world, and NEEM for justice. And there was a complete lack of any. Oh, I should say, and Eric's HMIS API for homeless management information systems. But for the broad swath of human and social services out there, there is nothing for day-to-day request for services, for benefits, for what am I eligible for? Nothing. And it was at that point that we started looking at, well, what can we define for them? I was initially eager to do something with NEEM, and for various and sundry reasons, it never went anywhere, mostly having to do with lack of interest from Health and Human Services to have anything to do with anything that wasn't fire. And that situation continues to today. So we started looking at, well, what is out there? And we kind of devolved into, you know, we may not be interested in, for instance, the pediatric, maybe pediatrics isn't a good example since one of our stakeholders is integrated care for kids, but we might not care too much about cardiology or oncology for in the fire models in terms of the resources that are defined. But, you know, though they're not called this in fire, the operational resources that fire is defined are actually really pretty cool. The fire subscription resource, you know, it's really based on an open source system that was originally defined by MITRE way back when, at least up until fire, 5, when they do great violence to it for good reason, but still. And you know, the fire questionnaire response mechanism, question and questionnaire response, is pretty slick. The fire referral mechanisms that are being defined in the clinical care SDOHIG working group, that's pretty cool. I have some concerns with it. Some of the work that we're doing in IHE's 360X closed loop referral on direct secure messaging based referrals. That's pretty cool. I have some concerns with that. But there's an awful lot of good stuff there that we could simply repurpose. We don't have to reinvent the wheel just because it happens to have the labor fire on front of it instead of NEAM on the front of it, especially if we're all heading in the direction of using the same basic transport protocol of HTTPS. Then it becomes a question of who defines the domain-specific messages and or resources or object class definitions or ontology for each of these new human services domains. I don't care, because we're going to end up defining them using OWL and generating JSON and XML. And all we really need to worry about is, how closely is our definition of a dozen different data elements: person, organization, service, maybe a few dozen. Actually, I'm already thinking of more that we need to align. But if we can come up with some agreement on those, it doesn't matter whether we call it NEAM or FHIR or PUBA. So specifically on the right-hand side, so that's how we got to the left-hand side, and all those places where it says FHIR, as well as some of the places where it says NEAM, because we recognize that the court's justice is a NEAM domain, not a FHIR domain. On the right-hand side, none of these, other than the homeless shelters, have had standards defined for them yet. So
Brian, let me know. Why don't you take a question? I think there's a couple of clarifying questions.
Apologies.
Courtney, I think, had her hands up.
Thank you.
Apologies. Hi, Courtney.
Hello there, Brian. Hello, everyone. Courtney Baldridge from US Aging. And I'm going to jump here and say I think we're a little bit different. Our agencies fall under the Older Americans Act. So we have some guiding standards that are kind of congressionally mandated. And those don't necessarily align currently with the terminology and the work at the gravity level. And I sit on the Gravity Strategic Advisory Council. So I see some real opportunity for a lot of work related to alignment. But I think we're a tremendous example of not fitting neatly into any of these buckets. And I know Brian and I have had very interesting conversation about this, and we'll continue to.
We'll have more.
Yes, we'll have more. So I think, our agencies, and we're in every single state, 620 area agencies on aging, 220 Title VI Native American aging programs in every state. And to further complicate things, the way that Congress created the Older Americans Act and mandated the creation of our agencies gave the power to the states. So the states got to add further data definitions. So our data standards and that data alignment is really not ideal, yet it's there. So these are some of the type of things that I think there will be a struggle to figure out, and I look forward to understanding how that's possible.
I think that's a case where we need to, in essence, define an ontology for aging, or however you want to characterize the name of that particular domain. And at that point, then we can start looking at, well, how does this map or not map into the other ontologies we have? And they're all over the place. We have a lot of them. That's the wonderful thing about standards, is there are so many of them. So the fact that the aging world has standards that are different from, for instance, what the Gravity Project is currently using, well, that's actually unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. We just need to figure out what the mapping is. We also, however, need to look at whether or not the mechanisms that healthcare is defined will really work for instance, doing referrals to these various folks on the right-hand side. And in fact, this was the point I was trying to, this is all a buildup for this final point, is that a year ago, we were working on a proof of concept demo. We're talking about being able to do a referral for WIC and maybe a referral for childcare. And we realized that doing a referral for WIC, we could expect that any organization managing WIC, especially because they're very often healthcare organizations, is likely to be able to handle the fire, clinical care, SDOHIG specification that defines a moderately sophisticated workflow for reading and updating task and fire and service request fire resources on a shared fire server. But that if we were expecting a small childcare, preschool childcare organization with 3 employees working out of somebody's home to implement what we were defining in the clinical care SDOHIG, it probably wasn't going to happen. Even the latest smart app workflow that we defined, you're going to ask somebody to install an app on their personal cell phone for exchanging information about potentially sensitive information about children in the care of their employer. That's not really likely to play out nicely either. So we started looking at, is there a simpler mechanism that we can do that would still be conformant? I shouldn't say conformant, compatible with the standards that we're working on. We also looked at 360X, which was closed loop referral from IHE. It uses direct secure messages to exchange CCDAs or specifically CCDs, continuity of care documents for clinical referrals. And then they realized, oh, we can't do that for social care referrals. Okay, well, we'll exchange HL7v2 messages. Now, for those of you who don't know what an HL7v2 message is, it's sort of warmed over EDI. It doesn't look pretty. It's really, really hard even for somebody in the business to read, let alone expecting somebody at a childcare organization to read this HL7v2 message. But we had an idea. What if we took the task and service request resources that were being defined and the use of them as being defined in the Fire Clinical Care IG, the gravity referral mechanism, and made them attachments to a direct secure message? Put in the body of the message something that a human being might be interested in reading about, we're sending this referral for this particular person for such and such a service or benefit from such and such a health or social care coordinator, because they have the following, put your whatever you can share in here about the reason for them getting this particular resource, being careful about not violating HIPAA unless a TPO relationship has been created. And if we did that, then human beings could just go to their inbox, whether it's a HISP in a direct trust ISP's inbox with this email message, or their own email message if it's been configured to deal with encrypted email. Read this message, at very least see the plain text content of it, which would include links that they click through to say, I accept this, I reject this, I provided the service, etc. And that it would be a much kinder and gentler workflow for the laundromats that deliver clean laundry to elderly shut-ins, the childcare organizations that help low-income parents be able to go to work, etc.
Brian?
So that's I got 6 words.
Okay. We're reaching the critical number of people.
So this is the reason that we ended up actually making a presentation to Direct Trust this past year, and Direct Trust said, this is a wonderful idea. We need to do this. How are we going to do this? Let's start up the Information Exchange for Human Services organization. So that's how
Brian, like your whole argument is this edge user, this CBO, can install a smart on fire app, but can receive a secure email message.
Yes, because everybody knows how to go to a web portal to get their email. So many of us already do through whether it's
But a
Facebook
smart on
or
fire
email or whatever.
standalone launch app can be rendered as a browser as well. So it's a workflow user experience problem. It's not a transport problem.
Okay.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. And I think that these smaller edge users, I think all of these users need to be supported with tools that they can use. I just, it's like, I want to make sure that my understanding of this picture was these dotted lines are things that need to be developed. There aren't existing standards for interacting with WIC and SNAP. The current implementations would have very specific customizations to configure them like NEEM doesn't solve this problem.
NEEM doesn't solve this problem.
Right.
Neither specifically does fire other.
No, not at all. Right, exactly. Like, there's nobody who's solved this problem. So I think I'm just trying to understand, like,
well, it's one of the things that
NEEM may be useful for this because of somewhere deep in the health agency at WIC, there might be a system using NEEM, but that doesn't mean that NEEM or fire or any other, is got an advantage. I just wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand the presentation.
Well, Aaron, there is another reason why direct is a useful standard for these types of messages, and that is every single certified EHR already supports.
Matt.
Yes,
I know.
Plus,
I know.
The directory.
Right?
So
There's 700,000 providers who have a direct email address, and 80,000 of them look at it. It's not, the technology is there, but if it's not being adopted and used, it's a useless technology.
Well, direct is a standard. It needs to be implemented with the technology for sure.
Right.
And so I'm not like saying direct is the
baked
end all.
into every EHR in the country today. I agree with that. It has been for 5 or 6 years.
I just wanted to say
it's really hard.
So within the world of referrals, that there is the problem of kind of like the walled gardens. I mean, even within clinical referrals, right?
Right.
And so we need a common directory and standards that allow us to look up endpoints so that we can make referrals across platforms. Right now, I think Direct Trust is the largest standards-based directory. But anyway, I'm not trying to put all my marbles in, the Direct Trust world. I just wanted to explain the other part of the argument, since Open City Labs was the one that led the conversation with Direct Trust. And with respect to your other question about eligibility and standards around applications for benefits, that's something that Open City Labs specializes in, and there is no standard for the data elements within SNAP application forms and other things. And there's also some variation across states because various states get waivers for like work requirements, for example.
Yeah, like that's a massive problem that any number of technologies might solve, right? And I was just trying to understand if there was some differential advantage that NEEM had that would lean us towards being able to determine whether or not the client sitting in front of me is eligible for the service that's being offered by this CBO. And I don't know I've tried to find it and I can't find it, right? That's what I'm saying.
Courtney, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Aaron. As being on the social service side and with the service providers, given that there is not currently standardization across the board of some of the basic terminology, it leads to a lot of problems. So and I will tell you, in our network alone, given that the states control the definitions, how a ride is defined in Ohio is different than Florida, which leads to different levels of service, different levels of professional certification and training, as well as different price points. And at the end of the day, even if you think your data is aligned, it is not. So there's some underlying issues that I think NEAM could in fact really help with to get one step closer, and hopefully you can begin to create some standardization and hope the system will align. Part of the problem is you're dropping that on top of a 45 to 50-year-old legacy system that was in place long before everything, all of this other work we're talking about. So that's part of the problem, is moving these legacy systems into a new world of standardization. I think moving to Brian's point on direct trust and the value of specifically what they're talking about over there is you do have mom and pop organizations and small CBOs that do not have the IT infrastructure, the systems. They're not using Epic, they're not using any of those. It would give them the capacity to communicate about their client to the various stakeholders, whether it's another CBO, whether it's an MCO, whether it's a PCP. It would give them the capacity to bolt something on and communicate, because currently they can't do that. They don't have the resources, nor is there anyone who, from what I see, is going to be stepping forward with the resources to help solve the problem across the social service system that will allow for appropriate integration at that level. And I know we even see it with our agencies. We have some agencies who are interoperable at a high level and, can work with the best of the system. We have a lot of smaller agencies that do not have the capacity and need an easy way to communicate with a clinical provider.
And I understand, I totally embrace the need, totally get it, right? What I'm challenged with is that there's many ways for me to enable secure messaging in a low resource environment. It doesn't necessarily require a PKI infrastructure to be implemented in an identity proofing event driven by third-party cert providers.
Well, I think that one of the things, you have to have a standard of trust.
Yeah.
There has to be a trusted standard. Our folks need that, as well as I would assume any clinical provider would need that. And for our folks, they need something easy. At the end of the day, these small CBOs and our network contracts over 18,000 local aging service providers. The vast majority of those are small CBOs. So you have to find a way to easily empower them, because they're doing their own IT. They don't have a professional on staff.
Aaron, is there a standard that you think is more appropriate?
Well, just having worked with the direct protocol for 5 years, right? And having tried to use it to enable patient access, I found it incredibly difficult to deploy at scale. I found it not really being risk-based on the assertions about the requirements around levels of assurance, right? And some of these other things, so that it ended up skewing the people who could actually play and participate to those who could afford the identity proofing events that are at the core of managing a PKI infrastructure. So the question becomes, is there a reusable way for me to identity proof the CBOs at the edge? Or am I gonna say that if you want to help people, in order for you to help people, we have this ceremony you must go through to get decorated with a cert that's recognized by the direct trust community, right? And that for me was, so let me, full disclosure, I worked on direct trust before direct trust was defined. I was at the ONC meetings. I heard Mostashari come and say to the world, we've figured out all we need is secure messaging and we'll have interoperability. It's 8 years later. And what we have is monodirectional secure communication between labs and docs. We have some very specific, great use cases, but I haven't really seen, and God forbid, I want to be wrong. How do we use a PKI-based secure messaging protocol to do trust and identity at scale? And I don't know anybody who's shown that, right? We wrote it into ARA, right? We paid for it. We gave it to every doc in the country, and not every doc in the country is using it. So it's not just availability and that the technology can do it. There's another part to the adoption that I want to stress. Maybe the answer is we just fund everyone to get identity proofs, right? I don't know.
Aaron, I think one of the things we see as a reality, and I may be very wrong, is with coding coming down the pike. Once docs have the capacity to bill, to make social determinant of health referrals, I think you're going to see engagement on a different level. And so there's got to be some mechanism to allow them to make that appropriate referral. So I think a lot is going to change as a result of
so there's a good argument, Courtney, that this will be a use case that drives adoption of direct messaging.
I think that since we're just about to enter into double overtime, I'll just I'll spare the. This is a great conversation, and that's exactly what we need to get to. My take on this is we're reaching a critical mass now, right? People have talked about SDOH for 25 years in academic settings. Health just started. We introduced it to healthcare 10, 15 years ago. It started coming up. Now people can get paid for it, and now people finally are adopting the fact that you're in the doctor twice a year, maybe, and 364 days a year, you're living in community, and you've got, look at home visiting, early care and education, same kind of mom and pop, tens of thousands of places that need to share. There's so many examples of it, whether or not direct trust. And Aaron, I've heard that, we're talking with New York City and Catherine at the, Rio there for the integrated care for kids implementation, and her hair stands up when we talk about direct trust. So I think that there's a past performance should be carefully scrutinized in terms of a projection forward, right? But I think there is a moment in time now with COVID and with resources coming down that we can actually do stuff and point at and see if it does work, because there's enough momentum now. I think there's enough critical mass that things are so, pardon my French, screwed up that we have to fix it. We have to address it. So
guys, I would use carrier pigeons and smoke bombs to do it. But I'm just, how do I get to adoption is what I got to get to. I can draw pictures with arrows connecting things, but does it actually help somebody?
Well, Aaron,
that's what I want to know.
Aaron, I'll tell you, for 45 to 50 years, our folks have been out here doing social determinants of health, and the rest of the world ignored us until about 5 years ago.
Right.
And suddenly, for a number of reasons, you are beginning to see, and now we're at the center of so many conversations with social determinants of health, and it's money.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's why we're having this conversation. Yeah. And I do think as a result of the money, as a result of whether it's, you've got SSBCI moving benefits under Medicare, you've got, Gravity certainly doing their coding. The landscape is there now. There's an infrastructure there, and I think follow the codes, follow the money, and it's going to force adoption. And it gives something for doctors to code against to be able to make these referrals. So then how do you communicate to these social service providers that, are not sitting on systems that are sophisticated like those in the health system MCO world? Mm-hmm. So there's got to be a bridge back to the home and community-based service providers and the small CBOs.
And I don't disagree with that. I'm just trying to figure out what is the right technology.
Oh, trust me, our folks struggle every day in terms of trying to figure out how they're going to connect in a meaningful way, and connect in a way with their databases, terminology, and systems that, again, have been sitting around for 45 to 50 years.
Yeah.
That the rest of the system has been building around them or next to them, not including them in large scale to this point. So, and with that, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I
Thank you
enjoyed
so
it. I
much.
like, I'm sorry if I didn't turn anyone off. I just
No,
want to
that's
find the
ex-
answers,
no,
you know?
That's exactly what we're focused on. We want to bring the right people to the table for the conversation. So you're welcome to do that. We're going to continue the conversation. I think Dave is going to talk a little bit about their May, June and their assessment next week to look at that as a potential model for front end consent acquisition to see if we can build on that. And then the following week, Kay Chopper is going to talk a little bit more about Kentera and identity proofing and stuff like that. We heard from Fido last week, and she and I had a conversation this week about how do we not only do Fido, but also do it broader. And then after that, following week, Stefan Konya, I may have those two reversed. Maybe the 9th, Stefan Konya is going to come and update us on a lot of the ONC kind of cool stuff that's happening, that's happened that I didn't even know about, and stuff that's coming up. So we got a couple of interesting things over the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll keep it going. So with that,
Awesome.
great.
Awesome.
Welcome. Invite your friends.
No
Talk to y'all
doubt,
later.
no doubt.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Aaron.
night.
Bye-bye.
Take care, all.
Yeah.